You're the lucky ones, because we're going to talk about something that's a lot more tactical and a lot more focused on competition from the entrepreneur's seat. So here I had the honor of speaking to an assembled crowd, some of you who were here in 2016 while we were on the rise of this journey. It's a pleasure, and thank you so much for the opportunity, Deborah, Sam, to come back and address the audience and talk about how far we've come. I never could have imagined that in 2 years we would have come so far, and I think that's the reason why I'm up here talking about it. But it wouldn't be without the help of a number of people, and Sam mentioned last night the power of our national labs. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for our national labs. Today, as one of the 2 lab directors that has served as the director of 2 labs, we have Tom Mason in the audience, and Tom was at Oak Ridge National Lab at the time that we really brought to bear together the opportunity to 3D print a vehicle for the first time, and we're going to talk about what that means today. So here's our update on the mobility revolution. I think that you would recognize both of these lines of products, and they are referential to each other, but in the last decade, almost every product that we use on a daily basis has been disrupted by digital. And take a moment to think about those products and how the ones on the bottom row have really fundamentally changed in what they do for you. Just to pick one, for example, if you think about the way we used to listen to music on a music box or even a Walkman, and now you think about how you listen to music on a connected device, it is no longer a place to listen to music. It changes your entire time. You can shop on it. You can listen to a podcast, which wasn't really thought about when we were thinking about listening to music as a way to do distributed content. And so that, as one example in the center of all these examples, is how devices have changed what we do. Now, Ben Evans, one of the partners at Andreessen Horowitz in the recent partner meeting that they had a couple of weeks ago, gave a really interesting presentation that I'll paraphrase. But what it said is, in the last 20 years, we have made investments in competitiveness in the United States that have been largely based on the acceleration of what the internet have brought us. But in the next 20 years, the kinds of businesses that are needed in order to be competitive are ones that need to understand much more than how to work the internet on our devices and in our homes. Because you need to be a master of science, you need to be a master of regulation, you need to be a master of understanding how to get things done so that the benefits of those internet-based companies can actually come to bear. So these types of devices are the ones that the next 20 years are going to attack. And they're going to change. And it's sad for me to be on stage today while we're looking at major plants from GM being announced in their shutdown phase, and also to see 6 lines of vehicles at GM and recently 4 lines of vehicles from Ford being shut down. But I can guarantee you, with no malice of afterthought toward the people whose jobs and families are affected, that train sailed a long time ago. And so we can gnash our teeth about it, but the problem is that we're not really fixing the underlying problem. And so focusing on how to affect those things that come from big manufacturing is why we started Local Motors. And 2 years ago, I introduced what we were up to, and this update is really to take you where you're through. I live by this mantra all the time in the vehicle world. If you're going to transform a brand or a product, and they're so related to each other, you just can't do the same things, only better. I once had a soccer coach that said, today we're going to do the same things, only different, because we're going to win. And so I think when you think about the way we look at the vehicle industry and the larger product making industry overall, it is about going back to the drawing board. And 2 years ago, I promised we would go back to the drawing board. And these are our 2 major elements that have never changed since the founding of our company. Global co-creation tied to distributed digital micro-manufacturing. And so what does that mean? Well, it's easier to tell it in the story of the products that we make right now. And the team here at the Council on Competitiveness worked super hard to get one of our products in this hall so you could have seen it. because nothing changes your mind like actually being able to go up and touch connected innovation and understand what it is. Unfortunately, the doors at the Reagan building are too small to fit the vehicle in. And so the elevators are big enough, but the doors are too small. So we'll have to do it by presentation. The complexities of high-speed vehicles have masked the innovation that we've gone after. Clayton Christensen wrote a book on disruptive innovation. And if you think about it, what we have done in vehicles is a start in working at the disruptive innovation angle of building vehicles. Looking on your right, or on your left, excuse me, on my right, is the example of a simple vehicle. It's a Mercedes 1950s 300 SL Gullwing. And that vehicle, you can already see at that time, had so many parts to make it come together. This was the world that Henry Ford and Frederick Taylor gave us. It is the world that has given us 60-second takt times on making vehicles. It is the world of mass manufacturing. In order to be able to make a competitive factory today, you have to make a competitive product. In order to make a competitive product in the next 20 years of the internet, you have to stay customer relevant. And the switching costs of customers has gone down so low, given financing and Uber and Lyft, you don't even need to own a car in order to be able to get a ride. But if you're going to reinvent mobility, the people who make the vehicles now need to be responsive to that, and they need to say, how can I make that mobility that you use, that you probably aren't even going to buy, how do I make it more productive while I'm making it safer, while I'm making it more efficient for you to use? So we started with this concept with the Oak Ridge National Lab's help in order to be able to make a vehicle more simple in its production. And the picture on the right shows you a vehicle that was made with 50 parts. Now at the beginning we hadn't crash tested it and it took us 44 hours to print, but the writing was on the wall. 2,500 parts in the vehicle on the left, 50 parts in the vehicle on the right. Now the traditional automakers came out in legion and they said, oh, but it's not crash tested yet, or you don't have all the Lexus-like features that you need in the vehicle. And that was true at the time. But today, only 2 years beyond, we are now introducing this vehicle. And this vehicle is one of the world's first 3D printed self-driving shuttles that you will ever hear about, because we're the only company that does it. Now, you wouldn't buy a 3D printed shuttle or even ride in it because it's 3D printed. You ride in it because it reinvents the mobility that you have. And what I'm proud to say is this is not happening in China. This is not happening in any of the ballyhooed places that have been mentioned today that are our juggernauts of competition. This is happening actually right here, but it is also going to be distributed all over the world. And we're going to teach Chinese people how to manufacture, but we're going to hold on to the internet-based connections that make these vehicles get better on a day-to-day basis. That is the power of micro-manufacturing. And so I'm going to explain a little bit more about it. Ollie is real, and Ollie is real today, so it's better in the words of these kids than anybody else to understand how exciting it is.
It was amazing getting to drive on the first 3D printed self-driving bus. That was absolutely amazing.
That young man got in our 3D printed self-driving bus and we blew him away. And I can guarantee that he is one of our future workers. But we're not going to hire him alone in our microfactory. We're going to ask him to help design the next vehicles that we go after. 2 years ago, Ollie wasn't even on our roadmap. Think about that. We have created out of whole cloth, because of the institution that we created with global co-creation and micro-manufacturing, America's first self-driving shuttle. It didn't take a Lordstown plant in order to be able to make that happen. And there is zero tooling cost that goes into making these vehicles thanks to the incredible science and technology that went into the 3D printing of a vehicle. Now, we can't make them as fast from a takt time perspective, but what we can do is keep pace with technology. And that is what is likely to inspire a young man like this into working on our projects and importing that knowledge to the next vehicles that are going to get made. This is a company that was built on the first 20 years of the internet and is now going to lead in the next 20 years of the internet. So just like Ollie, here's where we accelerate. Ollie came into the market, and we, through our global co-creation platform, were listening to customers and saying, what would you do if you had an autonomous vehicle? It's not about taking the driver, like Waymo is planning to do, out of a minivan. It is what do you do when you're sitting in that minivan that really counts. So when you think about where we can go, you're looking at all of these areas. And these are not your traditional areas of I get in a car and I go to job, or I get in a car and I go to airport. I get in the car and I can do all of these things that are on the right. It's about use cases in what you're doing. And so our path to deployment, to get really tactical on this, is if you're looking at an Ollie as a cognitive self-driving shuttle, it's about best practices in each area where it's being used. So if I'm going back to this slide, I'm looking at the places on the right: healthcare centers, municipal downtowns, destination theme parks, the things that we do in our life. And what you're doing is you're saying, I want to learn what are the best practices for a cognitive autonomous shuttle in that area, and how can I use risk and evidence-based work to be able to tell you and make the best product for what you're going to use. Educating the public. Here we are in Washington, D.C., and the federal government has asked us, I mean, we're a tiny company, and they have said, could you help educate the public on what autonomy will do for them? That's a tall order for a small company that doesn't have a big reach. But when you go to our place in National Harbor, which is just across the bridge in Maryland, that facility is set up for every afternoon to do public education about autonomy. And in January 1, we will have rides open to the public where you can go ride in National Harbor on a self-driving shuttle that's 3D printed. Please go try it out and stop saying that autonomy is not here right now, because our regulators are asking for your feedback, and you could only have really meaningful feedback if you've had a chance to go experience it. So the message here also is censored, stewarded, local, and low speed. When you increase the inertia that you have on these vehicles, you increase the chance that if there's a problem, that the hazard will be severe. So we have chosen with Ollie to go slow at the beginning. We're not a highway vehicle. We're not out there trying to get you fast from one city to the next. We're working inside the city and in even smaller areas. And as I mentioned before, the United States can lead, but in a micro-manufacturing world, all countries can win. And that's a twist for a Marine. I spent 10 years in the service, and it's the genesis of why I started this business, but I'm not a passport-waving fool when it comes to making things in the United States. I want to do amazing things all over the world and have US leadership in technology. I quote from a man who's sitting in this audience that he ran a national lab, not for the nation, but a national lab that was accessible to the world. That's a bold vision. So here is Ollie in Chicago. No sound on this, no need for sound. People on, people off, people going places, and no driver. Here is Ollie for school children. We have an obligation. We have an obligation to be great. This clarion call that came out this morning is very much about this obligation. And we're taking it on the chin as a small company to not wait for somebody else to tell us that we have to do things different. It has to be done, and it has to be done with private capital to make it happen. And so for us, taking on the biggest system of them all is the charge. It is a huge industry, and it is one that needs no explaining in terms of what it can mean for productivity. It is about resources. It's about safety. And so for us, more is not the answer. For us, it is about taking this really long 7-year development and supply chain and turning it into something that starts to shrink and then goes into 6-month development cycles. 12 years ago, when I wrote the plan to start this business, everybody said developing a car in less than a year was totally insane. But today we've done it. and you're looking at Ollie right now. And so it's coming out, and now, as I said, is here where we accelerate. We're in 5 markets right now. By the end of the month, we'll be in 7 markets. And those next 2 markets are Phoenix and Sacramento. We ran the first Ollie Fleet Challenges where we provide the vehicles for free for a period of time, and the locations compete to be able to say what the best use case is for autonomous shuttles. And starting December 12th, we will officially unveil the Greater Washington Ollie Fleet Challenge. So that means right here in this town, people will have an opportunity to compete for a fleet of Ollies. So you can go see them in National Harbor, and then in January, late January, this fleet will arrive to the winning entry here in Washington, D.C. And we will continue to run the Ollie Fleet Challenges around the world so that people have an opportunity to see what a micro multinational can do. And our goal, starting next summer, is to be the #1 name in global autonomy around the world. So that's what we're about. If you want to check it out, go to localmotors.com. I call it manufacturing disrupted, but really it's about the products and the people that we serve. So thank you so much.